So, okay, gentlemen, I'm going to make some introductory remarks as people sign up, and then we will be live on YouTube as well.
Frank, long time. Oh.
Yes, one moment.
Frank, I'm saying
Yes,
long
sir.
time since I heard from you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are around.
Okay. Okay. Live YouTube.
Okay, I'm just setting up the page, and once we go live, I think we can. Great. Okay. 1 second, gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, we would be starting in 3 minutes at 18:30 hours. Yes.
Eric, you are 5 minutes ahead of time.
Is my clock too fast?
Yes, it's 2:23. It's 23 minutes past at the moment.
Okay. Since you are using my watch. Okay. All right. A matter of housekeeping for members and participants. Please ensure that you have your name on the list. If you use your phone name, organizing team may be forced to or compelled to take you off the platform. We would like members to have their proper names on the system. So as Samsung SM9 and so on, please ensure that you rename yourself properly. Thank you very much. And also, if you'll be kind enough to use the chat to send in your email addresses in the chat, send it to everybody or to me or Mr. Richard Ghani as a chat, and we would be able to forward to you further information regarding this interesting dialogue.
Three. Eric, we are not hearing you. Eric, I'm not hearing you.
I think he's muted his
Yes.
mic.
So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second in the energy series that the 60 Plus platform is organizing. The 60 Plus platform is a team of over 60-year-old professionals who have decided to come together and share ideas on topical matters, and also to see how we can mentor upcoming professionals in the workspace. My name is Eric Yanka, and today we will be talking about getting out of the energy quagmire, making a case for sustainability, and we would be focusing on distribution and the demand side perspectives. 2 weeks ago, we had this similar conversation that focused on the supply side or the generation side. We are hoping that in the next couple of weeks, we would also have the chance to look at the third leg of this subject, which has to do with regulatory and policy, and then also have a look at how financing and other issues can also be dealt with. As a promo, let me also add that we're not going to be talking about energy alone. Indeed, within the next week or two, we have a fantastic lineup of issues, and the immediate pressing one would be to discuss the impacts, implications, and the reality surrounding the Niger military coup and the international crisis thereof. So watch this space, and if you send in your email addresses, as I said, via the chat on this platform, we will be able to recognize you and invite you for the series that will be coming up. On that note, therefore, it is my pleasure once again to welcome you. As I said, my name is Eric Yanka, and I will be your humble moderator. But humility is a trait which comes if you don't know much, or if you know much and you want to lie low. Today, we have the best in the system to come and speak on this very important topic. We know a lot of people blame the distribution companies. They insult them for all manner of reasons. Sometimes it is not backed by facts. Sometimes it is just innuendo, hearsay, or basic, sometimes, let me use the word, illiterate perspectives. Today, we have the people to do the discussion. And our first on the panel is Andrew Tonto Bafo. I'm not using the titles, but Engineer Andrew Tonto Bafo, a long-time friend, long-time director, many divisions at the ECG, and then also the director and coordinator for the GetUp project at the Ministry of Energy. So he's had both practical, operational, and policy perspectives and on the distribution sector. He would begin the discussion with some short presentation. Then we also have Engineer Frank Akligo, who is also a long-time friend of mine. We worked together in the VRA. He served in the North and rose to become the managing director of NETCO. He's now retired, of course. That's why he's in the 60+ group. And then last but not the least, our third panelist is Jabish Emisa Arthur, who, for those of you who participated in the first series, know him very well. He is also a past deputy CEO of VRA, a past CEO of the Bui Power Authority, and the managing partner at Arthur Energy Advisors, one of our boutique or premier energy advisory consulting companies in the country. And so without much more to say, I welcome all of you. We do have 2.5 hours. There will be time for all of you to ask enough questions, but I'll let our three panelists open up the floor with some introductory remarks and presentations to set the ball rolling, and then we can have that. I urge each one of you not to put on your video for the time being. I also urge each one of you to hold on to your microphones until we get to the question and answer time. There would be enough. And today, based on the popular request, if we have to stay for a few more minutes, we would do so in order to address all the questions. So thank you all very much for coming. And I would like to invite Engineer Andrew Bafo Tonto to come on board with his opening remarks. Andrew.
Thank you, Eric. I think I now can share, since I'm presenting a short paper for people to understand the distribution system and demand side management. Go.
Yes, you can. You can share your screen.
Eric, can you see?
Yes, we can see. I can see your screen.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to this 60 plus. As the chairman said, it is getting out of the energy sector quagmire. The case for sustainability, the distribution and demand side perspective. This is just a rough idea of what is our Ghana's access rate, and then our consumption per capita as of 2022 is 725 kilowatt hours.
Andrew, can you put on your video so that members can see you as well?
Freeman?
But you continue while that is being done for you.
No, I've done
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
What is sustainability? In the broader sense, sustainability refers to the ability to make support a process continuously over time. Sustainable energy is defined as energy providing affordable, accessible, reliable energy services that meet the economic, social needs within the overall development context of society. Basically, we're trying to look at energy, and we last we haven't defined the sustainable. Sorry for the drop. Having defined the distribution is basically a avenue through which consumers are able to access electricity. So you produce the electricity by the generators, and then the transmission people move the bulk power to various centers, and the distribution makes sure that it is in your house or your industry or your kiosk. The implication of sustainability on the energy sector, I have looked at it from 3 points of view. Efficient delivery of the energy by the distribution companies, efficient usage of electricity by the consumers, and the financial strength. Now I take each. On the delivery side, we have to ensure that supply meets demand. And therefore, power purchase agreements should be enforced according to how the market rules are, which will allow for spinning reserve and losses in the electricity AC cannot be stored. Fair and transparent implementation of regulatory issues, technical commercial environment by the PURC, Energy Commission, Environmental Protection Agency, they all play critical roles in ensuring that there's fair and transparent planning and design of the distribution infrastructure according to acceptable standards to meet existing demand and growth. So you don't plan to just service the people now. You have to allow for growth so that the system can hold on for a longer period before you either upgrade it or expand it. You have to construct network strictly according to the standards. Operation and maintenance of the system according to best practice. And then installing appropriate reactive load management system. With time, you see that the voltages will go down. Then you need voltage regulation. You have to put in static load compensators at appropriate ends to make sure. Then one key thing we need to do is to monitor and measure the system losses. I'll give you some short statistics of the distributions, the two big distribution companies in the system. There are three. There's one, Enclave Power, but that's a very small one. ECG has a customer population for about over almost getting to 5 million. Netco is 1.2. If you look at their demand, ECG is about 2,300 and Netco is about 340. Sorry for that mistake there. And then energy-wise, ECG is consuming almost purchasing about 14 gigawatt, 14,811 gigawatt hours. Netco is about very roughly about a tenth of what ECG does. System losses basically is the key, and that's why I brought you here. You see that ECG has about 30.6 for 2022. Netco, not much better, 28.3. It only tells you that 30.6 of the energy they purchased cannot be accounted for. They didn't sell it. But the losses have technical and commercial. The technical part is what the network, the transformers, the wires and everything use internally. They heat up and that you have to account for it. But the commercial part is just theft, stealing and billing problems, metering problems, all those things are combined together. If you look at it, PURC is saying that they will allow 22% losses. And if you compare it to World Bank for a developing country, it's 12 to 15%. For the technical losses, ECG is about 9.84, is 7.44. And Netco situation is quite precarious, it's 11.89. So if you look at the commercial, World Bank is suggesting about 5 to 7%, while we are doing 20.76 and 16.44. Collection rate is 80% and 85% for Netco. And new service days is about 51 days. If we ask for a new service, ECG will take averagely about 51 days, whilst Netco take about 42 days. If you look at the losses, the cost, 1% of transmission losses is about $12.63 million per annum. And for the distribution, the commercial losses cost $10.3 million for 1% per annum. And then the technical losses is about $8.48 million dollars per annum. So if you combine, for the distribution losses in ECG only, it's about 18.98 million for 1%. So if you're able to save even 5%, you are talking of almost 100 million we will save. That's something.
Okay. Thank you very much, Engineer Bafo. Jarvis?
You're not done.
I'm not done.
Oh, okay.
I haven't reached anywhere. No.
Okay.
But if
Sorry.
you look at your time, I haven't taken anything.
No. I thought the screen went off, so I thought you had finished. Sorry.
No, it's a link, and I think I pressed something wrong. Okay, sorry
please.
for the disturbance. So for the efficient use of electricity, we have to implement demand-side management. And the demand-side management is initiatives and technologies that encourage consumers to optimize their energy use. One would say, why should a distribution company be interested in a demand-side management? we will soon get to know. You need legal and institutional framework to support this thing. If you look at it, LI 1815, for instance, came out that we should use light incandescent have to go, and then we bring in the CFLs. Now it is LED. Collaboration with regulatory institutions to create fair and transparent with demand side management. The regulator, the commercial regulator, can easily come out with a tariff which will be imperative to use power recklessly. You need continuous education. There must be a buy-in by the discos and other utilities, as I already used. And there must be some provision of incentives, like using time of use tariffs, so that during the peak period, people are incentivized not to use the power around the peak period, especially between 6 and 10. Then beyond that one, they come in full swing. So if you show signs of that, they will work. Subsidy for capital equipment. We have applied this before, where the industrial customers were made to buy power factor corrections with some lease agreements. Then tax exemptions can come in. For the residential group, under the demand side, it's a question of using efficient lighting, as I said earlier on. Instead of CFL, can I use LED? Then your efficient cooking methods, then the use of efficient appliances, those with higher star rating on the energy guide. So you have to look at it from irons, kettles, refrigerators, air conditioners. And as at now, Energy Commission has come out with LIs on all these things. So when you go, it will be star rated and you'll be able to buy efficient one. The commercial industrial users have to look at it from efficient lighting, proper ventilation, and then good air conditioning, proper load management within their industry, efficient motor drives, and power factor correction for those who don't use a lot of inductive motors. For the financial strength, the distribution end is the fulcrum of revenue mobilization of the power value chain. The effectiveness of revenue collection strategies of the distribution is crucial for financial strength of the industry. The present revenue collection rate of 80 to 85% is woefully inadequate for financial survival of the utilities. The average technical, commercial, and collection rate, ATCC, stands at 50.3. This 50.3, their losses, commercial and technical for ECG is 30.3, and their collection rate is 20. So when you add the two, you get 50.3. Netco is about 43.4. And these are incongruent to the best practice, where you are not to exceed about 5%. Recommendations. Reduce system loss, especially commercial losses that require not much capital. Reduction of the system losses will result in revenue to the utilities. It will reduce investments in the distribution infrastructure and subsequently transmission and generation facilities. To reduce technical losses, long 11 kV overhead lines should be converted to 33. For instance, if the 11 kV line is carrying 30 amps, and if you convert it to 33, it will only carry 10 amps. And the losses are square of the current. So for the 11 kV at 30, the losses will be 30 squared, which is 900. And then at 33 kV, at 10, the square is only 100. So you'll be saving 9 times by just converting 33. Yes, it will cost you some small capital, but you will recover it within a very short period. I'm also suggesting that high voltage distribution system be encouraged. Under GDAP, we experimented it. It's doing very well, but it's very expensive to convert existing low voltage networks into the high voltage distance. So our suggestion is that the new expansions ECG and NETCO are doing, plus Minister of Energy should go with the HVDS so that we do a lot more high voltage and do very little LV distribution, because most of the losses are coming from the low voltage network. ECG should consider upgrading Accra sub-transmission system from 33 kV to 66 kV. This, they need a feasibility study to be able to confirm my suggestion. We, in the NETCO area, I'm suggesting that additional BSPs, bulk supply points, need to be introduced to curtail extremely long 34.5 kV overhead lines. From Yendi, we have one 34.5 kV line, which comes all the way to Ketekrachi. And it branches to Salaga, it branches to all over. And if we introduce a BSP at Bimbila or Juale around that point, another one can also be introduced at Nakpanduri area there to feed Boku and other places. So we'll have to use technology to improve our operation and maintenance activities. And we can go on. I personally don't see why ECG is not on GIS as at now. We can use the distribution management systems, the automatic meter reading systems, maintenance management systems all over. We should be able to. These are now on the market everywhere. Management of the DISCO should be committed to enforce their strategies on revenue protection. Revenue protection group are just the people who go out to catch the thieves, to look for illegal connections, and they need to be committed to help them. The commercial regulator must ensure that adequate tariff is in place. The DISCOs should strategize to improve the ATCCs at least from the 50 to about 25, 28 within the next 3 years. Management of distribution should prioritize and control their expenditure. The management should also build the necessary capacity for their staff, because if you want them to do these new technology, IT and other things, they need to be built up. In conclusion, efficient energy use.
Andrew, before you conclude, for the benefit of our members, what is ATCC?
It's average technical, commercial, and collection rates.
Okay.
That is the sum of the technical and commercial losses plus your revenue shortage. If you are supposed to collect sales 100% and you do 80%, the 20% is treated as losses.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, please go ahead. You can conclude now.
Efficient energy use implies cleaner environment. A successful demand-side management program is a win-win situation for the consumer, the utility provider, and the nation at large. Efficient management of the distribution system should contribute to the reduction of losses and thereby ensure sustainability. A healthy financial industry will be capable of embracing new technologies and innovations to support sustainability of the energy sector. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will not take questions right now, and I would also not try to summarize until we have heard from our brother Jabish. I would also like to request all participants to please turn off your videos so that we would have we would manage it for you from here. Jabish, if you would please come on board.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Let me start it and then let me know if you are seeing my share.
We can see your screen. Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay.
But it's yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. So the topic we have already had, so I wouldn't spend much time on this slide. Let me go to the next slide. Now, the overview of the distribution system sector. The overall performance of the function indicates that currently the principal threat to sustainability of the power supply in Ghana is financial. This situation we see has arisen from two related challenges in the performance of the distribution function. And these two are, one, unaccounted energy, and two, shortcomings in billing and collection. In this presentation, what I'm going to try to do is to examine these two issues using empirical field data and utility records as examples. The work has been done from the ground up and not from the top. And we will see the data as examples to shed light on what is causing these problems, which is essentially financial, and the magnitude of the challenge that is contributed by each of these things we are looking at. So we'll look at the performance, a very quick look at the overall performance of the distribution function, examples there. We'll identify the main contributors to the challenges, and then we look at some field evidence on what is causing it and the magnitude of the challenges that we face in order to come up with what the recommended ways forward could be. This first slide is an example of what is happening. Let me get my laser pointer. Yes, let me get my laser pointer. Okay, so in the first stacked column, we show the energy that has been injected into the system and where it has gone. Now, this graph is saying that 58% of the energy that is injected is accounted for by credit meters. 13% is accounted for by prepaid meters in this particular area we are looking at. Street lights account for 12%, and unaccounted energy is standing at 18%. So after looking at the energy, then we will look at what has been billed. Now, what happens is that the unaccounted energy clearly is not billed, so it's not part of what has been billed. Street lights, there is a small factor. Every consumer in this part contributes to street lights. So there's a street light portion, but street light itself is not billed. And then we have this is looking at the money that have been billed. And when you look at it, the credit meters had consumed 58% of the power, and they were billed with 60% of the bills that went out. The value came from the credit meters. 4% came from MDAs, and 18% came from prepaid meters, what was billed. Now, when you come to look at what was collected in this case, then credit meters contributed only 19%, and then prepaid meters contributed 20% of the collections. Quite often, what we see here, and so for what we are looking at in this particular case, for 100% of the energy that was bought, unaccounted energy, street lights, collection, billing, everything, by the time you get to the end, what you are collecting is about 39%. And so when you look at it as a business, the business is losing 61%. Now, quite often, the operators tend to break it down. This is technical loss, this is commercial loss, this is this loss. And then the numbers are floating over the place, and you can't get a sense of how much is disappearing. This is showing what is disappearing. That's 61% of what you inject it disappears. Okay, or you don't get money for it, let me say it that way. And you get money for only 39% of what the power you bought. This is an example of one area that we looked at. The second one will show a similar thing for another area. And this is what was for another area. They had a much larger unaccounted energy portion. The energy that's injected into that area, the unaccounted is 40%. And these are the ratios, and this is what happens. And you see that the overall, what is missing overall is 56%. So that is a picture of what is going on. And this fundamentally is the cause of the worry for sustainability, not just of the distribution utilities, but the entire sector, because all the sector, as Engineer Bafo indicated, the rest of the supply chain depends on the distribution to bring in the money. They do the retail, they have to bring in the money so that the rest can get paid. And this is where the challenge is coming from. Okay, so we see that the challenge is coming from two areas: unaccounted energy and then shortcomings in billing and collection. And we have three areas that we look at under unaccounted energy: unregistered accounts, illegals, and high system usage and equipment losses. And we will provide the data in the next slides on what is happening under each of these and what we have seen from the ground. Now, so the shortcomings in the billing and collection also come in the three areas. There's the coverage and inclusion of customer accounts in the billing process is one area. Then there's another issue with what we have called 0 kilowatt hour billing. And maybe I'll explain that a little better when we get to that point. Probably let me do that now. Now, when you ask the utilities to report on their billing and collection, they will tell you that they have billed almost everybody. In this case, what we have done is we have taken what was billed, and then we have looked at how many of them were for 0 kilowatt hours. There are a lot of bills that go out and there's no kilowatt associated. So it's just a service fee, which is, I think, 2 cedis and something that goes out. There's no kilowatt. And we are calling that 0 kilowatt hour billing. And we'll be discussing that. Then we also look at the regularity and consistency of billing and purchases. When we say billings, we are talking about the postpaid meters. And when we talk about purchases, then we are talking about prepaid meters. So the terminology from now going forward, when we say billings, then we are talking about the postpaid, those. And then when we talk about purchases, then we are focusing on prepaid. When the two together, we'll just call it billings/purchases. Okay, so now let's look at what the data is saying as to what is going on in the ground. This, what we had done here was to go back into the field and go door to door and document each connection that had been made to the distribution network. And this is the outcome we had. That we found that a total of about 16% of the connections that were extracting power from the network were unregistered. That those taking the power could not give us an account number that would tally that the utility had. And the utility had no account number for 16% of the customers. They were not in the billing system. 4% of the connections were illegal, and 7% had various other forms of anomalies. For instance, the meter is in one area, but then the database says that it is in a different area, and you can't see where it is. There's, for instance, there's mix-up of the meter reading routes and cycles, so that when you use the routes and cycles, you can't find it because it has been given a wrong cycle or a wrong route, and it's not where it's supposed to be. But 72% of all the connections were registered okay, and they were in the billing system. So this is what we found on the ground, having visited door to door to see what is going on and to document what was going on. Now, so in total, we see that about 15 to 20% of the customer connections are either unregistered or illegal, and they are not. These unregistered and illegal connections are leaking power, essentially, and contributing to the unaccounted energy, as their consumption is not captured and is therefore unbilled. So that is the picture on registered and unregistered customers. The next thing we looked at was the possible sources of losses, the system losses, equipment losses. And we took a significant number of transformers, the distribution transformers, and did measurements on each transformer to assess their loss, the level of loss occurring inside the transformer. And what we did was to plot the distribution loss at this point on this axis, the y-axis, and the loading level of the transformer on the x-axis. And so each dot here represents a transformer that was measured. And for these distribution transformers, the standard by which it's supposed to be procured is that the loss level of a distribution transformer is not supposed to exceed 2%. So we have drawn the 2% line. Distribution transformer loss is not supposed to exceed 2%. All its whatever loading it is, whether it's no load, that is zero load, or it's 100% loaded, the loss should be less than 2%. But this is what we found. There were transformers that had losses way up here. So we divided them into three groups. Those below 2%, 0 to 2% loss, we say they are acceptable loss level. 33% of the transformers that we surveyed had acceptable losses. Then those that were high but were not too bad, between 2 and 5%, there were 22% of the transformers that we surveyed that had high losses, above the 2%, but not too bad. Then there were another 20% that had very high losses, between 5 and 8%. Remember that the standard says 2% or less. These transformers were around 5 to 8%, 20% of the total number of transformers we're looking at. And then extreme high, beyond 8%, there were 25% of the transformers that were losing 8% or more. And that is the fact on the ground. So what we were trying to do was to look at what is actually happening on the ground and not dealing with it at the theory level or from the top level, or transformer loss is supposed to be this or this is this. What is actually happening on the ground? And this is what we see. So these are the transformers that have the high losses, extreme high losses. And it became clear that it really didn't matter whether it was lightly loaded or heavily loaded. The loss levels were just a characteristic of the transformer. Some of them were lightly loaded. This is less than, this is probably about 25% loaded, and its losses are probably 8.5 or 9%. This one is loaded a little over 100%, and the loss is 10%, and so on. So this is what information coming from the ground that we found. Let me go to the next slide. The next slide, we'll then start to look at the collection and billing challenges. The first factor we looked at was how well the utilities billing database is covering the connections that are in the field. So we went to the field and verified the connections in the field. So this data is what we saw in the field. This data, this column is what we saw in the field, and this column is what is in the utilities database. So you'll see that in the field, we found that about 5% of the connections had been genuinely disconnected. So, and it was almost the same in the database. We also found that there were about 9% of the accounts or connections that were not being billed. There was 83% that was correctly being billed, and then there was 8% of the customers or the connections that had no account numbers. And so we have summarized this here. 8% did not have account numbers, 83% had account numbers, and they were really in the billing and purchase system, so they were okay. Then 9% of the connections, they had account numbers, but they were not being billed. Bills were not being going out to them. And on the database side, they had 27% of the connections that were in the field. They had account numbers that we couldn't find in the field. So there was this large number of account numbers supposedly in the database, but we couldn't match them to any connection in the field. So that is part of what we saw. So let me go to the next slide, which will. Okay. Now we are looking at the, let me move this from the top here. Postpaid billing, and we are looking at the anomalies. Now, we looked at the accounts, the connections, and we separated those that had been in service for the entire year from those that were just brought in during the year. And so when we say postpaid customers who were in service the entire year, that's these blues. And the new postpaid customers who were brought on in the middle of the year, they are in this shaded one. So what we find that what we are talking about, 54% of the connections had been in service. They are postpaid, they have been in service through the year. 3.4 were just brought in the year. That is just by the number of accounts that are in service. Then we looked at the entries in the billing database and what proportion came from them. When we looked at the billings, the entries, the billing entries in the billing database, 56% of them came from the 54% of the postpaid customers that have been there the whole year, and 1.9% came from the 3.4%. So it was clear that all the entries, the actual entries exist for about 99% of what was expected, because you expect that each account will be billed each year. 99% there were entries to do that. Then we looked at what we had been concerned about, the 0 kilowatt hours. When we eliminated the entries that were for 0 kilowatt hours, the non-zeros became only 38%. So from 56%, when we eliminate the zeros, the 0 kilowatt hours, we dropped to 38%. And that is what we saw. We did the same thing for the prepaid accounts. So let's go to the prepaid chart. This is the corresponding analysis of the prepaid. The prepaid accounts in that area constituted 37% for the prepaid that had been in service for an entire year, and 6.1% for the new ones that were brought in the middle of the year. But when you then look at the entries in the database in respect of purchases of the prepaid meters, it drops from 37% to 23%. But the prepaid didn't have a lot of zeros. It drops from 23 to 21%. So there are 2% of the entries for prepaid that were zeros. So it's not as big a problem as we are talking about in the other part. The total of it between the 23 to 21, 2.2 to 1.2, the total zero kilowatt hours entries for prepaid was 3%. Now, so that is a picture of what is happening. So we began to look at what is happening regarding especially the accounts that had been in service the whole year. And the blue section deals with the postpaid, that is the billings of the postpaid. And this other section deals with the billings, the entries of the purchases for the prepaid. Now, for the postpaid, all these accounts had been in service for the whole year. So we are expecting them to have 12 entries in the database. Each of them had been in service the whole year. So monthly billing, we're expecting that they'll have 12 each and no zeros, nothing. They should have 12. But this was the actual. The shaded one gives the actual. Only 38% of that number were billed 12 times. 15% were 11 times, 7, so and so and so and so on. And 3% were billed only once. 3% of those who have been in service the whole year were only billed once for the whole year. And then 0 was 18%. But this 0 may include those who had been, let's say, disconnected or other things. So you don't pay too much attention to the zeros. There's probably an explanation for it. When you looked at the other side of the equation, that's the prepaid purchases, it was a similar story. We were expecting about 92,000 entries. If each prepaid account was buying every month, sorry. But this is what we found, that 9.2% of them purchased every month, but then this was the distribution. So we began to look at what is happening in another perspective. And so we started to analyze, especially for the prepaid, what was happening. And we saw that the number of times customer accounts purchased varied from 1 to a maximum of the highest number we saw was 48. 48 meaning that account was buying, let's say, 4 times a month, mainly weekly. And then we categorized them according to this. Those who bought 22 times in the year and above were shaded like this. Those who bought 13 times and above, that is at least every month they bought 1 time, they were shaded this. Then those between 10 and 12 were considered as, and those who bought 1 to 9 times in the whole year, they were shaded like this, because we are trying to analyze what was going on. And those who bought 1 to 9 times, we classified them as infrequent purchases, because looking at each of us as individuals, we can guess what do you expect to be the frequency of purchase for a prepaid customer. I know that I buy at least once a month, sometimes twice a month, because when I think I've bought enough, getting to the end of the month, I see that I'm getting low, then I buy again. So we weren't expecting anybody to purchase less than 9 times in the year. Then there were those who were the frequent purchases, that is the 13 and above. Now, when we looked at the areas, we saw 2 distinct groups of behavior. There was one group that we would describe as they had low infrequent purchases, that the number of people in the area who were buying 1 to 9 times was very low. And there was a high frequent purchases. The number of customers who were buying in the high range, 13 and above, was very high. That is, high mean there were about 70% of the customers were buying frequently, and a very small portion, less than 20%, was buying infrequently. We thought that was probably what we would expect. But then there were other places where those who were infrequent were very high. more than 40% of the accounts in that area were infrequent, less than 9. And then the very small portion were frequent, that is 13 and above. And and the chart we have is like this. So this type, this group A is what we were expecting to see. And there were a few of the areas that had this kind of behavior. That 77% of their customers or the consumers were frequent buyers 13 times a year or more. But there was a 9% that was less than 9 in the whole year. Then there was another, in other areas, we saw a markedly opposite behavior. 55% of these people bought less than 9 times a year, and only 15% of the customer base in that area bought 13 times or more. And that is what the data says. That is a fact of what the data says. When you put the two together, this is what you have. You have seen this chart before. So the share of accounts between prepaid and postpaid is like this. When you get to the entries in the database, there's a first shortfall that comes mainly from no entries from the prepaid customers. Then when you get to the non-zero entries and you start to take the zero entries out, you get another fall, such that by the time you get to that point, you are just about 61% of where you started. Then we also looked at this third tier, which is how regularly were accounts being built. Remember that the curve we had before, and then we looked at that as well. So what we found was that 0 kilowatt-hour billing affects 17% of all entries on the postpaid side. 17% of the entries are 0 kilowatt-hour billing. On the non-purchase or the 0 ppm entries adds up to only 18% of the prepaid side. I think I'll leave this and then go on further in the interest of time. So the way forward that we see to get this sector to be sustainable, as we have said, our view is that there are two principal problems that put into question the sustainability of the power supply in Ghana. And that sustainability question is all coming through the financial concern. The first one is the unregistered and illegal customers, and these have to be addressed. We think that for sustainability, we have to consider involvement of indigents as private participants to be responsible for the retail function. And that is the only way we can address this unregistered and illegal connections. That is one prime way we see for doing that. On the equipment losses, we think that we have to enforce the transformer law standards, especially during procurement. And we have to replace those that have excessive losses, because we were surprised at the level of losses coming from some of the distribution transformers. We should identify the source of high equipment use and high system losses and assess and remedy these. 0 kilowatt-hour billing. We have to find a way to minimize these occurrences, and there are recommendations on how to do that. And the avenues by which 0 kilowatt-hour billing is going through has to be plugged. That we have to plug that hole. On the prepayment meter and their purchase frequency, we were really surprised. I think the assumption had been made that or the tendency of the utilities had been, when you have put a prepaid meter, you can essentially go to sleep. But what we found out that there's a big hole coming from there as well, especially how can a customer purchase only 2 times in the year when he's using prepaid? It doesn't make sense to us. We think that it's worthy of looking at it and assessing it. We actually found was that 66% of the prepaid customers bought made purchases in less than 9 months of the year, only 9 purchases or less in the whole year. And we think that there's something fishy going on that may need to be explained. Now, one of the remaining challenges for the utilities is the collection of the bills. We think that to improve, one of the challenges comes from delinquency, people who run up a bill and kind of disappear. We think that now that Ghana card is here, for traceability reasons, the utilities should begin to register their customers according to a Ghana card, so that the customer can never disappear again unless he goes to the cemetery. So I think that we think that the utilities should really get on board with the Ghana card thing and register their customers according to the Ghana card. Then the customers will never be able to run away with an unpaid bill. They will go and run up a bill in one village, and when he's transferred, that is it, he's gone, and nobody can find him there. So, Mr. Moderator, I think that is our presentation for today on what we can do to ensure the sustainability of power supply in Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you very, very, very much, Jabish. Again, I would not ask any question, but there is one question that I believe I should ask you, Jabish, before you shut down your presentation. This is from Owusu Piasa, I believe. He's asking, what year time frame is your data collected?
2022.
2022. So, Mr. Owusu Piasa, you've got your answer there now. There is a hand up, Mr. Lawson. I would hold on to that hand until I have heard from Engineer Frank Akligo, his opening remarks. I believe the tone is really being set, and we are all going to see exactly where we are with the situation on the ground. So thank you very much, Tonto and Jabish. Frank, the floor is yours.
Yes, moderator, thank you very much. In fact, the presentations have all followed one particular path, the fact that we need to do something to ensure sustainability and also to see how we can minimize the investments we require in a construction of new power plants. In all our submissions, we challenge ourselves to look at the distribution and demand perspective. Various submissions that we just listened to and previous ones all show that our distribution networks have power loss of up to 40% or more in certain situations in the distribution network. The loss can be classified as commercial, non-technical, and technical losses. Studies have shown that these losses are approximately in the ratio of 50-50. Whilst they all require investment to reduce them, studies and experience show that it is easier to reduce the non-technical losses. Engineer Bafo and Engineer Jabish have spoken into details about the various causes of the technical and non-technical losses. The technical losses, as they indicated, are associated with the supply of power through the power infrastructure for one portion of the network to a customer. This can largely be minimized by removing overloads in the network. The non-technical losses are those associated with theft and illegal connections, among others. This can also largely be minimized by monitoring, as indicated by Jabish in his closing remarks. We need to monitor our prepayment meters very well. We had assumed for all this time that when you put a prepayment meter, your problem is solved, but no, we need further monitoring. The reduction of the non-technical losses requires collaboration with a number of stakeholders. We need to involve the community leadership. All the people in the community must be involved to make this reduction a success. Another loss we encounter, which Engineer Bafo and Engineer Jabishwa spoke about is the collection loss. Whilst not all the power purchased by the discos are sold, not all the sold energy is paid for. Collection rates are 80 to 90%. So there's a loss of collection of about 10 or more percent on the average. Approximately, therefore, about 50% of the power purchased by the discos is not paid for. In fact, some studies show more than 50%. A reversal of this trend will improve the financial position of the discos and also minimize the investments required in the building of new power plants. The Energy Commission and the Ministry of Energy undertook several works in demand-side management, culminating in the introduction of legislation on efficient appliances, education on efficient uses of power, and many more. In conclusion, what I would say is that a combination of the minimization of technical and non-technical losses, reduction of collection loss, and demand-side management will enable us to minimize the need for investment in the new plants and also lower the cost of electricity. We therefore recommend that all the studies be brought together for holistic implementation. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I had my simple submission there.
Thank you very, very much, all three of you. Indeed, you have touched on quite a number of critical factors. I think let me start from what I'll call the class one of power. You all use the word customer, but I believe there are consumers. So, Engineer Bafo, what's the difference between a consumer and a customer in the context of a distribution company?
A customer is one who is registered with the company. Is the one who has applied the company and gone through the process and being connected to the system and registered, and he can be given bill. A consumer generally is the general public. Everybody has access to the electricity in some way. So the one who has been registered, we are calling customer, is the one who is held responsible. But if you take a house, there are children and other people in the house, but maybe the landlady or the landlord or the man or the woman in the house is the one responsible whose name has been registered, and he is the customer. But all the other people who are using that electricity for whatever purpose they are using it for are consumers. So basically it's a commercial term used to show between client and customer, but the usage of the electricity, like street light, everybody uses it. So it's a consumer issue, it's a public issue, and everybody, when the light is on the street, everybody's enjoying it. It doesn't matter whether you are a customer or not. So the consumer is basically generally the one who uses the power, but not responsible for paying for it.
Okay. All three of you raised the point about control and improving, if you will, the oversight of the sector in order to capture all the revenue and close all the gaps. Indeed, you talked about the need to enforce demand side management through the enforcement of LIs. You talked about ensuring that the rating systems where you see these yellow stickers on equipment from the Energy Commission. You also talked about a radical redesign of the distribution system, particularly with the loads in order to reduce technical losses by converting the long distance 11 kV lines to 33 kV lines and the like. And Jabish also talked about tightening recognition, the customer recognition system by having the use of the Ghana card and so on. So all three of you, can you rehash those arguments and see whether in today's context we are doing the right thing and what else we could do? So I put this to all three of you. Maybe Frank, you can go first, and then Jarvis, and then Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Yes, we really can do it. It's doable. The discourse will just have to pick up the challenge in collaboration with the Energy Commission and the Ministry of Energy. And we come up with a very detailed implementation plan. And all these are doable. What I want to say is that the discourse will really need the support of all the key players in the energy sector. They will need the support of the communities they work in. You know, our experience is that if we don't support the discourse, they may not be able to give us a good service. And the cost of supply will really be very high. So it's doable. It is really doable. We need to come together and strategize on how to implement all these strategies.
Thank you very much. Jarvis?
I think that what we have found is that it is possible to, it just requires attention. It just requires attention. For instance, if you look at the large number of what we found, 0 kilowatt hour billing, why they do generate the bill, but there's no kilowatt hour based on it. And so it's just a service charge that goes out. Now, what do you need to plug that hole? You have a certain number of connections that have account numbers that are in the billing system, but the bills don't go out to those people. What's the reason? And it should be easy we think that it's easy for the utility to address this. As for the connections that don't have account numbers, a big part of that problem, if not all of it, is coming from the way that we have been implementing the rural electrification and sharing. You know, so the ministry and others have awarded contracts. Meters are given to parliamentarians when elections are coming, and they distribute in the village, and people connect themselves, and the utility doesn't know. It's not keeping track of it. That's how come most of those connections that are consuming power, but they don't even have account numbers. And the ministry will buy meters, and they will share it to DCEs and parliamentarians who will take it to their village and go and distribute, and people will connect. Why do we do that? So there are things that are easy to fix, but we just have to put our foot down and fix them. So what the first part of the problem is identifying where the leaks are coming from. And some of the work that has been done has done that. For instance, I'm not sure that the loss levels of distribution transformers. It was clear that when we order transformers, we don't check what the loss levels that are coming. And I'm hearing stories about transformers that have been ordered and that the supplier has used aluminum as the conductor inside the transformer to reduce costs instead of using copper. And it comes, and the loss is very high, and you don't know where you are losing it. And we have shown that a large part of it is coming from the distribution transformers, that many of the distribution transformers that are in the system, their loss levels are above what everybody assumes, that it will be maximum 2%. Some of them are 18%. In fact, we had one that had 18% loss level. So there are things that can be done to fix it, and it is doable. That's what I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tonto.
Mr. Moderator, the issue is a bit more complex than we are looking at. Because if
Okay.
you take it from the point of view of the transformer, for instance, what the transformers the Ministry of Energy or SHEP tends to use, it doesn't go through the ECG's strict transformer specification issue. It doesn't go through it, though it claims they use ECG's specification to order these transformers. But there is nobody to even check those transformers, because he will give a contract to, in brackets, a Chinese company, and it is supply and install. He brings his own transformers and install them without ECGs playing any role. So how do we know that the transformers they have brought can meet the standard of ECG or even the national standards? So it's not that simple. Because of this political connotation to these issues, we need to bring maybe a dialogue where the regulators, the policymakers, and everybody sits down and we take a decision. Because under no circumstance, for even meters, how can a minister or government just take meters and give it to politicians and let them go and share it in their distance? I blame ECG a little bit. Yes?
Engineer Bafo, I think that it's not as complicated. It's simple. The ministry is not set up to be an implementing agency. They have to get out of this thing of being implementing agency.
But the politician, the politician uses that to get votes. And therefore,
I know,
it's not as simple as just on a forum like this to say it. Unless we bring all of us together, the politicians there, the regulators there, the utilities management there, we all sit down, we argue, we talk, we come out with something which is binding to everybody. Otherwise, we will go through it. And it is not one group.
Can I be a devil's advocate?
Yes.
If ECG and NEDCO are the people currently operating the national distribution network in the north and in the southern part of the country, and they see, if I, as Eric Yanka, I bring a transformer from my neighborhood and put it there, ECG may not accept it if it does not meet their standards. So is it not possible for the management of ECG to come up and say that for Gamma Community 6, we have seen transformer type A. It does not meet our standards, and we are therefore not going to connect it, or we will not accept it being added to our network. Does it have to be an issue of the politician, or should it be a technical issue by the management and board of the distribution companies?
Eric, the problem
the
is
ideal,
that it would have been installed, and then they will call the utility to come and take over. It's been installed and done. And by the time the community has gotten the supply, the contractor has finished his work. Who are you to go and cut it off? And the second part of it is that, do the utilities even have the structure to test the transformer, whether it's meeting the standards, before they will accept it? They don't. And all they do is look at the type test results that are being provided, that, oh, this is the type test, and then it has been brought into the country. It has been given.
I think ECG has the test means to test the transformers. ECG at least have that one. But Eric, the issue is not as simple as, please, this one we are rejecting because it's not meeting our standards. You'll be fired. In the second place, the person who put you there has gone to bring the thing there, and you are thinking of going to challenge him.
Okay, so in part, the technical problem that we are facing is in part due to our inability to hold ourselves with the proper fiduciary responsibility based on the specific challenges caused by, let me not use the appointing authority, but the difficulties we face having to face that. So like you said, I think the best way would be to address that type of situation that creates an anomaly in the end, because ultimately we have 30-something% that we need to bring on board. Take out these losses. If these losses are caused by this inefficient way of adding to the system, the procurement challenges with non-standard or transformers that are not that efficient, and so on and so forth, then it's something that we need to hold ourselves dear. That means that we are not doing enough audits of the system. We are not doing enough reviews of it, and ultimately we will suffer the cost of these challenges. I think it is time to open the floor. Let me there are a couple of questions, but I'll ask them in a little while. But let me enable our members to come in now. And the condition I have is that please raise your hand and do not speak. And I'm going to allow you all to unmute yourselves when we call you. So please raise your hand if you wish to speak. Francis, I see your hand up. There's a Francis. If you can tell me your surname, so we can properly recognize you. There are a lot of Francises here. Francis, your hand is up. Tell us who you are, and you can unmute yourself and ask your question or make your contribution. Francis?
Eric, Francis Jatta, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay, go ahead. Please make your
Okay.
contribution or comment.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. First, I would like to disagree with Engineer Bafo that if you do the right thing, you'll be fired. That assertion is completely wrong, and we dispelled that in ECG in recent times. In terms of disconnections and so forth, people have now got the impetus and the teeth to go to even the Jubilee House to ask for money. So if you do the right thing, you will be supported. So if the transformer is bad and has to be tested and removed from the system, it can be done and nobody will fire you. Now, looking at Jabi's presentation, I really didn't start early. I feel we need to get the ECG MD or some director here to brief us on what is going on, because there's a lot going on now, and it looks like we are living a little bit in the past. The ministry is also doing a lot in terms of PSP, which is there for sustainability, and we hope that by the end of the year, we get private people involved in the collection of ECG's bills. Now, if you look at, everybody's speaking about technical issues, non-collection, but there's a big problem that we have not talked about, and that the losses due to forests, which ECG basically has no control of. ECG loses about $100 million or more every year in forest exchange issues. I believe the only way we can solve that is probably to quote the rates of exchange rate on a bill every month, which is not possible. So that has to be addressed and is being looked at. So that's what I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very, very important contribution, the latter one. The fact that the exchange rate losses are in the losses due to Forex. As you know, about more than 90% of the true cost of the distribution sector and the power sector in general is foreign currency based, from the fuel to the equipment. Yes, we do produce a minimal level of transformers, small transformers, and then also some cables and stuff like that. But in bulk, most of the things we need in the power sector in Ghana are imported. I don't see any other hand up at this time, but there were a couple of questions to do with enforcing the national standard. And Bernard Mode has asked, how do we improve the collection associated with street light billing or the street light consumption? I don't know, Frank, whether you would want to address that question.
Yes, the street light collection, there was some time ago, we attempted to meter the street light so that we can get accurate consumption data on it, but it was really a challenge. That was how come that we only estimate what we consumed on the street lights. So fine, that is something we have to look at and see if we can really do some more accurate measurements. It is possible though, except that we'll be spending so much money in doing that. So it's something we have to look at, yeah.
Okay. There's a Fred, but there's no surname to the Fred. The Fred who signed this up, tell us your name and then you may make your contribution.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Ango Bediako, former employee of EC.
Anko Bediako.
Ango Bediako.
Ango Bediako, okay.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
On to the issue of forests, which is identified as a problem. Kenya have a beautiful way of resolving forests as far as electricity is concerned. Every month, they look at the forest loss and then they surcharge every customer to pay for that. The issue of also the 0 kilowatt bill. On the surface, it looks very alarming. But if maybe they have done a further investigation, they will have seen other things. For instance, in certain regions in Ghana here, Volta, Central, Eastern, consumers or customers who consume below 50, they are more than 50%. And below the 50%, if one analyzes it, some truly consume 0. And the reasons may be some of these. Some of them, they are using this energy saving box. The meter will never record their load. Their consumption is very low, so it will never record it. The other ones, also, they may have been disconnected, but they have not completed the administrative process in the system. So if you do further, you see that they have been disconnected. Now, just to mention too, but there may be some few ones which is due to illegalities. That is some of the observations we made in the past. For prepayment, for prepayment, purchases can never be used to know whether you are getting things right. Their customers, they know what they have done on the system, and they will deliberately buy every month just to make sure that nobody will come in, because most people will look at it that once you are purchasing, then it's okay. But that is not the issue. I agree with Mr. Engineer Bafo. For UCD, some managers, district managers, have been relocated because of issues with project or SHEP. In Ghana or in ECG circles, they will talk about, just to mention some names, they will talk about abortion meters. These are people, they will be on ECG service with ECG meters. Later, when they have accumulated the debt, they will go and remove it and go for a SHEP meter. And these SHEP meters, which are supposed to be in the rural areas, it will be surprised you have some even at Makati or airport residential area. They are not supposed to be there, but it will come there. Street light. When it comes to the elections, as Engineer Bafo was saying, the street lights, everybody, parliamentarians are distributing their street lights, they are installing it. Who dare you go and remove it? So some of these things, I would say that there's a lot of indiscipline on our system. And it looks like we all have to come together to resolve this issue. Otherwise, the poor staff down there, there's little you can do. I'm happy to hear that maybe things have changed. I'm no more with ECG. So if things have changed, let's hope that it will change for better. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Fred. But we would like to kindly request that contributions be a little shorter. Mr. Lawson, kindly make your contribution very short, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and senior engineers and CEOs on the platform or in the meeting. I'm a former employee of Atta Energy Advisors, and I think I'm glad to hear my former boss, giving us all these breakdowns. My first thing is talking about street lighting. I think we should suggest to the ministry, and if possible, pass a legislation that every street light that we see on our street should be controlled. Maybe photo cell or a timer or something to control it, because consumers think they're paying for it and they are entitled to have the street so that their security will be guaranteed when they are working in the night. But here is the case: daytime we can have all these street lights on and nobody is controlling. He has fixed it, an MP has fixed it, and that is all. So I think that there should be a collective maybe discussion that all street lights should be controlled. That is my first point. Working on SHEP 4 or the self-electrification, the SHEP electrification project, I observe also that we had a lot of long transmission lines just to service a small village. And I think these things, a village of, let's say, about 5 cottages, 6 cottages, 10 cottages, and it is, you see that sending that kind of long transmission line over there, it's not reasonable. And I think sometimes it's even going to be a loss. And I don't know how ECG themselves approve, together with the Ministry of Energy, approve all those kind of communities for a contractor, or maybe for, maybe I should say a contractor, to be awarded such kind of jobs for them to go and do. I think basically it's going to be a political reason. But I think that as we are discussing these energy losses, these are strong things that we need to make recommendation to the ministry that these things never should happen again. And also, I would like to ask this question. From some time past, I learned that the Ministry of Energy was trying to do mini dams. I think Atta Energy Advisors was even a consultant to that.
Mr. Lawson, that is not part of our discussion today, the construction of mini dams and so on, unless it is linked to the distribution issue. Is it linked to the distribution matter?
I am trying to link it to the production. If maybe we can have mini dams or any renewable energy to replace all these long transmission lines, and if possible, those by the riverside who are using the rivers for Galamsey will feel entitled that, okay, instead of using our rivers for Galamsey, we can use it for also generate power, which we will not pay electricity, which also the community will enjoy free electricity for themselves. That is my latest suggestion.
Your point is well noted. Maximilian Quatin.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. And I would like to say, good work to all the presenters. Okay, so just on the tariff, I think I joined in late, but just on the tariff, a little study that I was privileged to join Engineer Jatta to have an assessment of our current structure was to look at the customer base and also the consumption. The average consumption, when we look at the residential category, the average customer base from 2017 to 2020 is hovering around about almost like 4 million customers. That is on the residential. If you extrapolate that to the actual consumption, and this is this number is representing almost an average of about 85% in terms of the customer base, and this is just focusing on ECG. If you look at the representation in terms of the actual energy consumed, it is also hovering around an average of about 42-43%. So let's say about 4 million representing a consumption, an energy consumption of about 42-43%. If you look at the non-residential, you have a customer base also hovering around almost 700,000, and that is also representing about 13% in terms of the actual energy consumed. The SLT, they have the lowest customer base because they consume a lot, and that is an average of about 1,600, and the actual energy that they are consuming is also about, I think that they consume the highest energy, and that is about 44%. My question is that, do we still think it is necessary to keep lifeline customers? The reason is that if you look at the tariff structure that we have now and the amount of energy that they consume, if you are to look at whatever they are paying for the amount of energy that they are actually consuming, this is about almost about 30%. It's just about, okay, it's about one third of what the average non-residential or those that are using electricity for value use, because essentially
can you please round up your question so that it can be responded
so
to?
my whole question is that my question is that is it still useful to still keep lifeline customers on the tariff structure? Because essentially they are using...
your question is made. I will ask
okay.
Brother Andrew Tonto to respond to just that specific question. Lifetime customers. I know you've done a lot of work in your previous life on that matter.
Mr. Moderator, I think it is relevant. For the social, the services shouldn't always look at it from the commercial point of view. As he said, how many people are even within that bracket? As of now, I think the lifeline from the PRC point of view is 30 kilowatt hour. If your consumption per month is 30 kilowatt hour, it started from 100 to 50, and now I think it's 30. So how many people use that much? So for our social principles as a country, the poor should also have access to electricity, and it should be relevant. And it's paid for. It's not that it is free. The subsidy is put into those who consume a little bit more than 600 units, and it's really paid for. So I think if people can prove that they are really that end of the social ladder, they should be able to enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that it's maybe we can put some context to that as well. I remember in the early 80s when the North was being considered for connection to the national grid, there was a lot of argument about whether there was enough load over there to justify constructing a very long transmission line all the way from Kumasi to Bolgatanga, Navrongo. And the VRA engineering department at the time, in collaboration with some research scientists, came up with the whole notion of long distance lightly loaded transmission lines. Then they also figured out a way, how do we drop power into some of the isolated communities where we could not, there were too few customers to be connected to a large transformer. So they came up with a shield wire concept. And that is even how the central region and the western region got their first TV signals through a shield wire to Kisi in the central region to power the GBC TV station. So there are times when you have to make specific interventions in order to bring service to people or to areas that will otherwise not be able to afford more expensive solutions. So that innovation, I believe, is also important. Kofi Ellis, and then Francis Jatta.
Thank you so much, moderator. Mine is just to pick the minds of the various presenters on something. There's been this talk about decentralizing the distribution companies beyond ECG and NETCO as a way of improving efficiency, especially in the commercial side. I want to know what you think about this idea of decentralizing distribution functions beyond ECG and NETCO. Over.
Thank you very much. I think I'll have all three respond. Frank, you go first, and then Andrew, and then Jarvis.
Yes, I think the smaller the discos are, more efficient they can be. I know ECG started something some time ago in Nungwa, but aside that, there are other experiences outside Ghana where the discos are small and they run very efficient, in Latin America. So for me, it's something that we should consider. It will make it more efficient. So I'll go for it. I mean, the smaller, the more efficient it will be.
Thank you very much. I believe there's a ECG SBU running the Ashanti region. Yes, in Kumasi. Yes. So Andrew.
I have no problem with breaking down ECG or whatever into some smaller units, in as much as they will be given a free hand to work. The problem of ECG is basically intervention. And Engineer Jatta doesn't want me to be that hard on them, but political intervention is the problem. If you give them small units and you do financial analysis of it and they can survive, go ahead. Because where is that the small units, where is the losses? The losses is in the LV network. So if you create and you just give a small unit to somebody and you are just giving him all the losses to pay out, he wouldn't financially be viable. So we have to do a real good study of the system and see if you create those small things. Because the SBU concept, when we started it in those days, we did a study and we realized that only Accra could survive. And when we did the bid, only Accra won, got some people to bid, because Accra was the only one which was viable. But, and for political reasons, they canceled it. Otherwise, Accra would have been on own, running by itself. So it's a proper study needs to be done before we decide whether we are going this thing. But it shouldn't be some political gimmick that go ahead, do make it SBUs or whatever the case may be. Can they be financially viable? That is key, and it needs a good study. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I agree with Engineer Bafo on that, because I remember in early days when we're trying to create zones for the power sector, the distribution sector reform. What happened was that we were trying to even combine southern Ghana with the north to form certain types of distribution zones. So it is really very important that we look at the zones that we'll create and assess their viability before we go on. We just don't pick any small community and say we are making it stand on its own. That will really be a challenge. So yes, we need to do some studies on this, and I think the viable units that will be put together.
I have a friend. Jabis first, and then
I think that what the question is, what did they mean by decentralization? If decentralization is what has been described by Frank and Andrew, that is a problem. I wouldn't use the word decentralization. And I agree with Andrew that the challenge is in the LV side and not necessarily the MV side. So I see private participation or indigenous participation in terms of the retail, and you can't break up the utility itself. Let the utility remain, but then let it outsource the retail function in small zones so that people can deal with that retail end of the business. If that is what is meant by decentralization, that I think will work, and that we need to do that in order to solve this problem. But if decentralization means breaking it up into this SBU thing, I don't agree. I think that the utilities should remain big like this, but they should get in areas, they should get out of the retail and just do boundary metering and hand over. Let's say you get a small place, like let's say you have a chairman. You can have some people take responsibility for a chairman. You put a boundary meter there, and they are responsible for the retail of the energy and the accounting for the losses and so on. I think that is the model that will work, not decentralization in the form of breaking it up into small units. That won't work.
Thank you very much. I see a hand, but I don't know whether it is Kinirus. Please identify yourself and you may raise your question.
Okay, my hand has been up. You called me to talk.
Oh, Francis, hold on a second, please. 1 second. Kinirus.
Okay, good evening to all of you.
Please identify yourself quickly.
I'm Nuruddin Abdullah.
Okay.
And I think this whole issue has something in line with my research as well. So I have keen interest in it. But my question is, what is our plans towards smart metering infrastructure? Because in all this, I see that could also be a way forward and a very viable way of addressing the commercial losses that we are talking about. What is our plans towards that? Thank you.
Thank you. Francis, before we put the question to the panelists, can you ask your question or make your contribution?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. First, I agree with Engineer Bafo this time. There's been, in the past, some intervention and interference in ECG, and that is being addressed now. And then the second thing is what Jabis talked about. There are arrangements far advanced, and the target is the end of this year. to introduce private participation in a retail end of ECG, which is taking it from the pole to the meter, which will be a source. And the country is divided into 7 zones. There is a transaction advisor, which is who is one of us. I can't mention his name. Very high up in the ECG, who is looking at that. And we're going to look at the viability of those regions, because you can't break it into so many pieces, because it might not be profitable or viable for the contractor. So that is going on now. In fact, there's a lot going on with ECG now, and I suggest that in the next forum for private distribution again, we need to invite the relevant people from ECG to take part. And then the 0 kilowatts. What we're also trying to do is to introduce some load limiters, which will limit basically you don't need meters anymore. That's going to limit those who consume from 0 to 30, the lifeline. And therefore, there will be a fixed amount. The meters are expensive. So there are things going on to address some of these issues. Thank you.
On the last point that you raised, Francis Jata, I can tell you that Frank Akligo and his colleagues at NED did a lot of physical installation of load limiters in the NED area. So maybe, Frank, you can share in a minute or two some of your experiences and how people were circumventing and were enjoying that.
Yes, when I heard Francis talking about load limiters, I smiled. You know, they have to look at it very carefully before they go into it. I don't think it was very helpful to us. Otherwise, we would have still been seeing load limiters in the NETCO area. Now you don't have a single load limiter in NETCO. So, Francis, it's a good idea, but let's think about it carefully before we go into it.
Yeah, there are some advanced ones now which you can actually interrogate. So we are looking at that, and there's costs involved as well. But there are sophisticated ones that if you tamper with, you to be basically a signal will be sent to the control center. So it depends on the cost.
Yeah, I think, Francis, it's not just even the cost, but the idea that a customer grows, and today he or she may be a 20 unit consumer, and as soon as he gets a little promotion or something, he doesn't move out of the property, gets additional equipment. And so once you have load limiters, unless it is adjustable, you may have a lot of challenges. That's why I think that the lessons learned in NETCO ought to play a huge role in the evaluation of your planning. That's all I'm trying to say.
Okay, that's what I'm saying, that what we, in the system now, you can actually adjust the current. Okay, but the customer has to apply for it. For instance, on the islands, we have mini grids. Somebody spoke about long lines. So the islands have mini grids, which is solar. When they started basically at 50 cities. After a few months, some of them have exceeded that. They came back to apply for 100. So those things are all there too. But of course, it will be studied carefully before it's deployed.
Okay. Mr. Free, your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. So back on this demand side management. I remember in the past when virtually we had VRA and ECG at the center, and the VRA producing the power, demand management was very apt then, because the fact that people were using power and there was a lot of subsidy. Nowadays, maybe because of the IPPs and the fact that we are using a lot of fossil fuel, that's where I'm concerned, because nobody talks about the impact on the environment. Because the IPPs, for example, if they have their way, people should use more power because then they make more money. Who is talking about educating the public about the fact that we have to use power efficiently? I know if they are hit by their pocket, they would feel it, but somebody needs to take responsibility that, look, we have to be very responsible about the environment, climate change. This is where I am. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. I don't know if any of the members would like to respond to it.
Mr. Moderator, I think maybe he joined us late because my presentation, about half of it was on demand side management and what we can get out of it, and how it's to in the environment. So maybe he joined us. But we are saying that there must be continuing education. We are also saying that the discos and other utilities need to buy in, because if they don't help, in Ghana, as at now, only Energy Foundation, I don't know whether they are still surviving. Energy Foundation has that capability of educating the consumers about an efficient use of energy. I have my doubts whether they are still there, but it's a long time I heard any of them making any noise or whatever it is. But the discourse needs to support, say, Energy Foundation to continuously educate customers and consumers on the efficient use of energy. It's in their own interest that your bill goes down.
Engineer Bafo, I mean,
yeah,
my small view is that, look, no amount of preaching to the consumer will work. If the price signal is right, he won't need to advise him. So, I mean, the preaching, preaching by itself will not achieve it.
I'm laughing here. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening and watching the 60 Plus Dialogue series. Today, we are talking about getting out of the energy sector quagmire, making a case for sustainability. And our focus today is on the distribution and demand side perspective. We are also streaming this live on YouTube. And I'm happy to say that our panelists are Engineer Andrew Toto Bafo, a former director of ECG and the director of Get Up at the Ministry of Energy, and is currently in retirement and enjoying life as a distribution and governance expert. Frank Akligo, also another astute power engineer, who is a former managing director of NETCO. And last but not the least, Engineer Jabishe Misata, managing partner of Arthur Energy Advisors, a past deputy CEO at VRA and the past CEO of Bui Power Authority. And so far, it's been quite engaging. We've spoken extensively about the notion of standards. We've identified some anomalies here and there. We've also looked at perhaps a future direction of changing the way we manage our networks. We've looked at questions like certain kinds of improvements, especially in the northern area where we have long distribution lines, increasing the number of bulk supply points down the line. And of course, the key focus has been to help reduce the whole subject of losses. And to that extent, we've also been discussing issues as to how to improve collection, how to improve control and recognition of load and so on and so forth. So it's been an interesting conversation thus far. Yes, we also are aiming to ginger through this discussion, further conversation among the professionals to get us where we want to get to. I see a complaint by Mr. Nuruddin Abdullah that his question has not been answered. And I believe you were making a contribution and talking about smart metering. This was looked at in terms of in an earlier point made by to two of our panelists, but I'll see if there is time to address that specific question. I see a hand up, Isaac Prempe. Please make your contribution.
Okay, thank you, sir. I'm speaking from Amstead. I think with the demand side, education side, I think the university at Amstead, that is Akente Apiamenka, have also made some strides that I just wanted to contribute to. They've introduced sustainability and energy efficiency as part of the general courses that students have. And I think going forward, if you get the opportunity to also have access to some of you may have to present some of these courses to the general student population. Yes, this is being done, and people actually are getting conscious at the university level. So if those can be stretched through other schools, whether second cycle or primary schools, I think it will go further. Because even in curriculum development, they have some aspect of energy conservation and efficiency. Thank you.
Yes, I think that the whole notion of education of customers was a critical point that was raised by Engineer Bafo earlier in his presentation. He spoke about it broadly. Engineer Jatta, do you have further questions? Just like to move on to other topics.
Yes, just a comment to add to what Engineer Jabich said, that education of the customers alone does not improve demand side. The tariff, basically, if the domestic, those who are actually using the electricity to do non-useful work, pay more, then people will start looking at conserving energy, switching off. And because that is the reason why we are looking at PRC is looking at collapsing the classification. But the difficulty has been the lower end, the domestic and the lifeline. The increase will be about 100%. So they are still looking at it and tweaking it. And if we have just a single tariff, it makes it easier for everybody. Industries will see a large reduction. And basically, the idea is that if the industries have lower tariff, they expand, people will get jobs, and they should be able to pay for higher tariff domestic consumption. So basically, educating the public alone does not help. I think their pockets are hit. I think people will start switching off. Thank you.
Yes, there's a question.
Mr. Moderator, let me quickly.
Please do. Please do.
If you look at the slides, the collaboration with the regulators, tariff was put there. We can put punitive tariff here. But if we can recall in 2007, 2006, 2007, we succeeded in getting the CFL introduced into the system by education. We had to do strenuous education about the CFL before the consumers bought it, because later on, the first one was free, but later on, it was going to cost them a little bit more because the incandescent bulb was cheap, and then the CFLs were slightly higher. But with education and they accepting it, now we have more CFL. Now, most people are using the LED. Why? Because of energy consumption. Yes, if the tariff is high, it's okay. But you can't raise the tariff to a point where people may not use the electricity at all. And that will be to the detriment of the distribution companies. So please, we need to bring the two together. But as for education, it has no end. Continue to educate them. Do other things to improve demand side management. Thank you.
Engineer, sorry, Mr. Yaisiape, your comment or your contribution.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. And I want to say I'm very sorry I joined in a bit late, but with all these discussions, they are very interesting and useful. I don't know whether mention was made of time of use tariff.
Yes.
Looking at the, okay, that's fine, because some of us have raised it at other places, and I know there's a lot involved, but we should start thinking about this as a country so that we can reap the benefits of this system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have a friend who is on this platform, and I know he's done some little work on the whole subject of concessions. I like to put him on the spot. Mr. Yabene, if you can maybe make a comment on the notion of concessions and smaller utilities, not smaller separate companies, but smaller segments in the distribution sector.
Well, moderator, whilst he's getting ready to come in, there's one topic. There's one topic that was broached that we haven't responded to, and the question was raised about the foreign exchange costs.
Yes, that was by Jata.
Yeah, and it was raised by Engineer Balfour as well. I think that was why the automatic adjustment formula for tariff was put in. I mean, so the question is how we can get that automatic adjustment formula to work, because that's exactly what it was meant to address on a quarterly basis. So let's not forget that and think that there was no arrangement for it. That's a small clarification I wanted to provide.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I also happen to know that all the utilities have a very big line in their accounts, exchange fluctuation debt on their balance sheets every year. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I think Mr. Abene is not available now. So let me then raise the other questions that have come. This is from Joe Nkrumah. He's asking whether, as part of improving the network and so on, whether there's any role for energy storage systems. I don't know, Jabesh, maybe you want to take that up.
Improving the systems, I don't see. Energy storage is not easy, and it's expensive. But given what we are talking about, I don't see energy storage being a solution at all. I don't see its application in terms of this.
All right. So, Mr. Nkrumah, you've got at least one view there. I like to go back to the whole notion of improving the efficiency of the distribution sector with the improvement in the procurement and deployment of equipment in the sector. What can we do? Should this be a regulatory matter, or should it just be a governance issue?
It's a governance issue. It's not a regulatory matter. You have a standard for the equipment you have to buy. And the example we are giving that we have on the ground, I don't like to talk about things that we haven't done the groundwork to be sure what is going on. You have a standard for the distribution transformers. You have distribution transformers that are way above that level. It's not a regulatory matter. It's an institutional governance and project implementation matter. That's how I see it. I don't know what the others think, but that's how I see it.
So the question therefore comes that, well, if you have $20,000 and the 20,000 can give you 10 transformers, which you can use to serve 10 key locations, would you be better off just serving 4 so that the rest 6 places will be in darkness? That's an argument that an illiterate manager or policymaker might make.
Oh,
So
I know that you are not illiterate, so you wouldn't make that argument because it really doesn't. I think that the shortcoming is that the admission of these equipments into service, there isn't sufficient confirmation that it meets the specs. That's all. Because of all the various avenues that are being used to bring these things in. And if the utilities were bringing in these things by themselves, then we could hold them, or they would hold themselves to meeting the standards. But now it's being brought in from all sides. And that's where some of this thing is. So my concern, for instance, what led us to checking the transformer losses is that if the transformer losses are 8%, and then you are saying just the transformer is 8%, and you are saying that the whole of the LV system and the distribution, MV, all of it should be 9%, it's not going to happen. And then when you do the calculations, they are assuming that transformers are 2%. Meanwhile, they are actually at 8% plus. So the whole analysis of where the loss is going, it gets skewed. And so we have to, the utilities really have to address this.
But Jabesh, if what you found, just sticking to that, the transformer example, if what you found can be extrapolated to the total universe of transformers in the network, would this be 40% of the transformers in the network, 30%, 60%? I mean, if you're extending that argument, which then can show the severity or the complexity of the problem from a national perspective?
Well, the sample that we took, 25% of them had losses beyond 8%, as I showed in the graph.
Right.
So okay. It's a percentage. So that is it.
All right. Mr. Jewu, your hand is up. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jabis.
No, so if it's the same condition across the country, then that's what we are experiencing.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Jewu,
Mr. Chairman, before Mr. Jewu comes in,
okay.
Let me especially on the first part, whether it should be regulatory or governance. It's true, right. Governance should play a key role, but regulatory should also pick a portion of it. Because now, Ghana Standards Authority and Energy Commission have presence at the harbor. So they are able to pick some of the samples and check whether they meet. And if they don't meet, you, the exporter, have to send it back. So the transformers, whether it comes from whoever, the source is immaterial. They will check, and if they check and they realize that your transformer doesn't meet the standard, you are told to send it back. And if they are really going according to the regulation as it is now, some of these things, they will block it before even it comes to the governance issue. But if it escapes them and somebody maybe use the land to bring it, and you can't get the people on the land borders all over, then governance should take over. Whatever comes to your system, you should be able to check. And ECG themselves are checking their own transformers. And a few of them at our time were rejected because the vendors were trying to take advantage of the system. But when they were tested and they realized that they didn't meet the requirement, some of them were told to take it away. So it's the strictness and how the regulators flock at the harbors and everything will help. So I'm only adding that, yes, governance should be very strict on accepting some of these things, but the regulators should also work. The Standards Authority and Energy Commission should also work assiduously. Thank you.
Within the power system, and this is to the three of you, within the power system, I happen to remember that things as critical as transformers, before they are ordered, there will be factory acceptance tests where engineers will go to the factory and make sure that before the manufacturer seals them, the right things have been put in and so on and so forth. They've gone through the full tests over the requisite length of time and so on. So that even before they are brought in, our people would have certified these things. Why is it that we have to now rely on standards board in Tema or Takrady or at the airport to reject a transformer when our own people could have done some of these things? Or these things, we are now in modern times, so these things don't matter no more.
Mr. Moderator, they matter, but businessmen are all not as honest as we expect them to be. So some are crook and some collaborate with others, connive with others, and then try to dodge the system. So to a large extent, they go and do factory acceptance tests, but they will give you samples you test and then to meet your requirement. You live and they are shipping, you are not there. So if you have ordered 200 transformers and you go and do a sample test of about, let's say 10%, 20 of them, and then they are loading and load 80 of them bad iron losses and bring it to you. Do you say because you have done factory acceptance test, so it should be okay? No. Some are not good, and some you need another level. That's why the regulatory group will also do their own independent test. And if they do it and they see it is, again, governance will also have to recheck, irrespective of the fact that they went and did it. When you go to the factory, you do normally, if the big transformers, they are not in numbers, so you can do all of them. But when you come to these distribution transformers, they are in numbers. Sometimes ECG can order as much as 500 or 1,000 in a year. And so you go and do sample tests, and the sample test will be okay, but you leave and then the bulk of it is coming with all its problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jehu, your hand is up. Mr. Jehu, your hand is up. All right. Well, we are getting very close to the end of our session today. So I would like to, okay, Francis, you have the last word before I give the remaining floor to my panelists.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I don't know why Mr. Engineer Bafo is getting away from his earlier session. All this equipment problem we have, basically also, you can trace it down to influence, peddling, and interference. Okay, if you do, you have reputable companies manufacturing the transformers, and checks have been done, but then we deviate from it because somebody else comes and introduces another one. Of course, we are going to have a problem. ECG has about 21 meters, prepaid meter, different types. Should it be so? No, all is because of intervention. Okay, get it from here, get it from there. So these things are, if we cut them out, then the technical guys will now do a thorough job to make sure that this equipment that we get meet the standards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to round up our discussion. I would like to invite, in the order in which they spoke, our panelists to give their last closing comments. Andrew Bafo first.
Well, Mr. Moderator, I think we've done well, but let me respond to Nuruddin's issue first about these smart meters. Okay, and it's been deployed. In fact, as of now, I think ECG is deploying a lot of smart meters. Netco is also equally looking, coming up with prepayment meters, which are all smart. So it is there. And in the presentation, I raised it under a general broad decision that IT or technology should be taken seriously, and that we should take advantage of technology and innovations as an issue. So it is broad. We weren't too specific on trying to say that go and buy smart people.
No, Andrew, please unmute yourself. Sorry about that. The line went off. Andrew, please unmute yourself. Yes.
What I was saying, so I have to repeat.
Partly, just partly.
What I was saying was that to Nuruddin, he asked for whether we agree for smart people. And I said it is already being deployed by ECG and NETCO. As to we raising it, I raise it in general terms that we have to take advantage of the technologies and IT in general, so that and innovations in general, so that we will be able to meet it. And I also subtly put it that we have to build the capacity of our staff. This is, you just can't bring the smart meters when the people have no knowledge about it. So we're looking at it that, yes, use technology and train your people to be able to do it. My closing remarks is that we need to look at losses. And it's very critical for our survival. If 1% distribution losses, commercial and technical combined, costs us $18.3 million US, there's need for us to concentrate there and make sure that we can do something, especially on the commercial losses. I will also advise the distribution companies that they should make a mantra that there should be no shortage of meters in any form in their system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jabish?
Okay, today's discussion was to focus on the sustainability of the sector. And I think that what we have shown clearly is that ECG and the distribution, the distribution sector is vital to the power supply and the sector being sustainable. And at the moment, the most serious threat to the sustainability of power supply in Ghana is from the financial side. And what is generating that is the level of unaccounted energy, and as well as shortcomings in the billing and the collection system. And most of these are within our ability to address, especially on the billing and collection side. It's within our power to address this without much more investment. There are other things that we can do, especially on the unaccounted energy and so on, as the data that we have presented show. There are things that we can do to improve this substantially. And when we do that, assuming that the tariffs are also set right, then the sector will be on a good path to being sustainable for the long-term future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Frank?
Yes, thank you very much, moderator. Well, we've all spoken about what to do to make the sector sustainable. And the key issue here is how to reduce our losses, technical, commercial, and then non-collection losses. It is very clear that if we reduce all these losses, the sector will be viable. And also, but there's one thing I want to add, in particular reducing the non-technical losses, that is the commercial losses. It requires a lot of monitoring, and it requires also collaboration from major stakeholders, particularly the communities, because if you want to go into a community to check illegal connections, if they don't cooperate with you, it becomes very, very difficult. So the communities must cooperate with the discourse to be able to reduce non-technical losses, which is easy to do. So that is my final comment. We need collaboration from all key stakeholders, the community leaders, assemblymen, everybody must be on board for us to be able to reduce our losses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my three panelists. Thank you very much to the 60 Plus platform for availing its platform for the general good. I know a number of you have raised some very interesting comments. Sophia Tijani raised that if all these fine brains were there in the system before, that they were frustrated or prevented from implementing some of these ideas there, then God help Ghana. I think what we've set out to do with these dialogue series is to bring out some of the issues for all of us to appreciate and begin a personal debate with the future of the country in mind. If you want to receive copies of the recording or the presentation or some of the questions that were raised, please, as I said, put in your email address in the chat now before the chat or before the dialogue ends. On this note, I'd like to say a very big thank you. Perhaps next week or the week after, we will do a very interesting, we will switch from power to diplomacy and come back to the power sector for part 3. But perhaps next week we will discuss, as I indicated at the beginning, the Niger coup implications for the future of West Africa. Our prospective panelists would be Professor Bafo Ajimandia, Professor Kwesi Enning, and Professor Vladimir Entry-Danson, who are all members of the 60 Plus platform. Watch out for the details and would wish all of you well. This evening, we've had a very fantastic discussion on the whole notion of the sustainability of the power sector, focusing on the distribution. Lots of lessons have been learned, a lot of what I would say fresh oil has also been poured in. For the record, I like to state that we did invite key people from the Electricity Company of Ghana, from NEDCO, from PURC, and so on to join us. They may have joined us. I wouldn't see exactly who has joined us in detail. Not everybody put out their names there. So we welcome all of you, and we hope that you'll be able to join us another time.